Same deal. A bunch of games, 3 levels of rewards. What happens? People offered the medium level of rewards, did no better than people offered the small rewards. But this time, people offered the highest rewards. They did worst of all. In 8 of the 9 tasks we examined across 3 experiments, higher incentives led to worse performance. Is this some kind of touchy-feely socialist conspiracy going on here? No, these are economists from MIT, from Carnegie Mellon, from the University of Chicago. And do you know who sponsored this research? The Federal Reserve Bank of the United States. That's the American experience. Let's go across the pond to the London School of Economics. LSE, London School of Economics, alma mater of 11 Nobel laureates in economics. Training ground for great economic thinkers like George Soros and Friedrich Hayek and Mick Jagger. Just last month, economists at LSE looked at 51 studies of pay-for-performance plans inside of companies. Here's what the economists there said. We find that financial incentives can result in a negative impact on overall performance. There's a mismatch between what science knows and what business does. And what worries me as we stand here in the rubble of the economic collapse is that too many organizations are making their decisions, their policies about talent and people, based on assumptions that are outdated, unexamined, and rooted more in folklore than in science. And if we really want to get out of this economic mess, and if we really want high performance on those definitional tasks of the 21st century, the solution is not to do more of the wrong things, to entice people with a sweeter carrot or threaten them with a sharper stick. We need a whole new approach. The good news about all this is that the scientists who've been studying motivation have given us this new approach. It's an approach built much more around intrinsic motivation, around the desire to do things because they matter, because we like it, because they're interesting, because they're part of something important. And to my mind, that new operating system for our businesses revolves around 3 elements: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, the urge to direct our own lives. Mastery, the desire to get better and better at something that matters. And purpose, the yearning to do what we do in the service of something larger than ourselves. These are the building blocks of an entirely new operating system for our businesses. I want to talk today only about autonomy. In the 20th century, we came up with this idea of management. Management did not emanate from nature. Okay? Management isn't, it's not a tree, it's a television set. Okay? Somebody invented it. And it doesn't mean it's going to work forever. Management is great. Traditional notions of management are great if you want compliance. But if you want engagement, self-direction works better. Let me give you some.
An evolutionary biologist at Purdue University named William Muir studied chickens. He was interested in productivity. I think it's something that concerns all of us. But it's easy to measure in chickens because you just count the eggs. He wanted to know what could make his chickens more productive, so he devised a beautiful experiment. Chickens live in groups, so first of all he selected just an average flock, and he let it alone for 6 generations. But then he created a second group of the individually most productive chickens. You could call them super chickens. And he put them together in a super flock, and each generation he selected only the most productive for breeding. After 6 generations had passed, what did he find? Well, the first group, the average group, was doing just fine. They were all plump and fully feathered, and egg production had increased dramatically. What about the second group? Well, all but 3 were dead. They'd pecked the rest to death. The individually productive chickens had only achieved their success by suppressing the productivity of the rest. Now, as I've gone around the world talking about this and telling this story in all sorts of organizations and companies, people have seen the relevance almost instantly, and they come up and they say things to me like, that super flock, that's my company. Or, that's my country. Or, that's my life. All my life I've been told that the way we have to get ahead is to compete. Get into the right school, get into the right job, get to the top. And I've really never found it very inspiring. I've started and run businesses because invention is a joy, and because working alongside brilliant, creative people is its own reward. And I've never really felt very motivated by pecking orders or by super chickens or by superstars. But for the past 50 years, we've run most organizations and some societies along the super chicken model. We've thought that success is achieved by picking the superstars, the brightest men or occasionally women in the room, and giving them all the resources and all the power. And the result has been just the same as in William Muir's experiment: aggression, dysfunction, and waste. If the only way the most productive can be successful is by suppressing the productivity of the rest, then we badly need to find a better way to work and a richer way to live. So what is it that makes some groups obviously more successful and more productive than others? Well, that's the question a team at MIT took to research. They brought in hundreds of volunteers, they put them into groups, and they gave them very hard problems to solve. And what happened was exactly what you'd expect, that some groups were very much more successful than others. But what was really interesting was that the high-achieving groups were not those where they had one or two people with spectacularly high IQ, nor were the most successful groups the ones that had the highest aggregate IQ. Instead, they had three characteristics, the really successful teams. First of all, they showed high degrees of social sensitivity to each other. This is measured by something called the reading the mind in the eye test. It's broadly considered a test for empathy, and the groups that scored highly on this did better. Secondly, the successful groups gave roughly equal time to each other, so that no one voice dominated, but neither were there any passengers. And thirdly, the more successful groups had more women in them. Now, was this because women typically score more highly on the reading the mind in the eye test, so you're getting a doubling down on the empathy quotient? Or was it because they brought a more diverse perspective? We don't really know. But the striking thing about this experiment is that it showed what we know, which is some groups do better than others. But what's key to that is their social connectedness to each other. So how does this play out in the real world? Well, it means that what happens between people really counts. Because in groups that are highly attuned and sensitive to each other, ideas can flow and grow, people don't get stuck, they don't waste energy down dead ends. An example. Arup is one of the world's most successful engineering firms, and it was commissioned to build the equestrian center for the Beijing Olympics. Now, this building had to receive 2,500 really highly strung thoroughbred horses that were coming off long-haul flights, highly jet-lagged, not feeling their finest. And the problem the engineer confronted was what quantity of waste to cater for. Now, you don't get taught this in engineering school, and it's not really the kind of thing you want to get wrong. So he could have spent months talking to vets, doing the research, tweaking the spreadsheet. Instead, he asked for help, and he found someone who had designed the Jockey Club in New York. The problem was solved in less than a day. Arup believes that the culture of helpfulness is central to their success. Now, helpfulness sounds really anemic, but it's absolutely core to successful teams, and it routinely outperforms individual intelligence. Helpfulness means I don't have to know everything. I just have to work among people who are good at getting and giving help. At SAP, they reckon that you can answer any question in 17 minutes. But there isn't a single high-tech company I've worked with that imagines for a moment that this is a technology issue. because what drives helpfulness is people getting to know each other. Now that sounds so obvious, and we think it'll just happen normally, but it doesn't. When I was running my first software company, I realized that we were getting stuck. There was a lot of friction, but not much else. And I gradually realized that the brilliant creative people that I'd hired didn't know each other. They were so focused on their own individual work, they didn't even know who they were sitting next to. And it was only when I insisted that we stop working and invest time in getting to know each other that we achieved real momentum. Now that was 20 years ago, and now I visit companies that have banned coffee cups at desks because they want people to hang out around the coffee machines and talk to each other. The Swedes even have a special term for this. They call it fika, which means more than a coffee break, it means collective restoration. At IDEX, a company up in Maine, they've created vegetable gardens on campus so that people from different parts of the business can work together and get to know the whole business that way. Have they all gone mad? Quite the opposite. They figured out that when the going gets tough, and it always will get tough if you're doing breakthrough work that really matters, what people need is social support, and they need to know who to ask for help. Companies don't have ideas. Only people do. And what motivates people are the bonds and loyalty and trust they develop between each other. What matters is the mortar, not just the bricks. Now, when you put all of this together, what you get is something called social capital. Social capital is the reliance and interdependency that builds trust. The term comes from sociologists who were studying communities that prove particularly resilient in times of stress. Social capital is what gives companies momentum, and social capital is what makes companies robust. What does this mean in practical terms? It means that time is everything, because social capital compounds with time. So teams that work together longer get better, because it takes time to develop the trust you need for real candor and openness. And time is what builds value. When Alex Pentland suggested to one company that they synchronize coffee breaks so that people would have time to talk to each other, profits went up $15 million and employee satisfaction went up 10%. Not a bad return on social capital, which compounds even as you spend it. Now, this isn't about chumminess, and it's no charter for slackers, because people who work this way tend to be kind of scratchy, impatient, absolutely determined to think for themselves, because that's what their contribution is. Conflict is frequent because candor is safe. And that's how good ideas turn into great ideas. Because no idea is born fully formed. It emerges a little bit as a child is born, kind of messy and confused, but full of possibilities. And it's only through the generous contribution, faith, and challenge that they achieve their potential. And that's what social capital supports. Now, we aren't really used to talking about this, about talent, about creativity in this way. We're used to talking about stars. So I started to wonder, well, if we start working this way, does that mean no more stars? So I went and I sat in on the auditions at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, and what I saw there really surprised me, because the teachers weren't looking for individual pyrotechnics. They were looking for what happened between the students, because that's where the drama is. And when I talked to producers of hit albums, they said, oh, sure, we have lots of superstars in music. It's just they don't last very long. It's the outstanding collaborators who enjoy the long careers because bringing out the best in others is how they found the best in themselves. And when I went to visit companies that are renowned for their ingenuity and creativity, I couldn't even see any superstars because everybody there really mattered. And when I reflected on my own career and the extraordinary people I've had the privilege to work with, I realized how much more we could give each other if we just stopped trying to be super chickens. Once you appreciate truly how social work is, a lot of things have to change. Management by talent contest has routinely pitted employees against each other. Now rivalry has to be replaced by social capital. For decades, we've tried to motivate people with money, even though we've got a vast amount of research that shows that money erodes social connectedness. Now we need to let people motivate each other. And for years, we've thought that leaders were heroic soloists who were expected all by themselves to solve complex problems. Now we need to redefine leadership as an activity in which conditions are created in which everyone can do their most courageous thinking together. We know that this works. When the Montreal Protocol called for the phasing out of CFCs, the chlorofluorocarbons implicated in the hole in the ozone layer, the risks were immense. CFCs were everywhere, and nobody knew if a substitute could be found. But one team that rose to the challenge adopted 3 key principles. The first was the head of engineering, Frank Maslin, said, there will be no stars in this team. We need everybody. Everybody has a valid perspective. Second, we work to one standard only, the best imaginable. And third, he told his boss, Jeff Tudhope, that he had to butt out because he knew how disruptive power can be. Now, this didn't mean Tudhope did nothing. He gave the team air cover, and he listened to ensure that they honored their principles. And it worked. Ahead of all the other companies tackling this hard problem, this group cracked it first. And to date, the Montreal Protocol is the most successful international environmental agreement ever implemented. There was a lot at stake then, and there's a lot at stake now. And we won't solve our problems if we expect it to be solved by a few supermen or superwomen. Now we need everybody. And because it is only when we accept that everybody has value that we will liberate the energy and imagination and momentum we need to create the best beyond measure. Thank you. If you look at how the neural networks in our brain are formed, they're really built to make our thoughts and our responses much faster and much easier. And what that means is that whenever we encounter something that's familiar, we'll prioritize that information. It will just feel better. It will be conscious faster. And so our minds are kind of built biologically to attract and process and prioritize the stuff we agree with and slow down or forget about the stuff that we don't agree with. And, you know, that's why if we have certain political views, we buy certain newspapers, we watch certain news channels, and so on. Actually, to be smart and well-informed and thoughtful, we need to encounter the people, the attitudes, the information, the opinions that we're uncomfortable with. Not necessarily because we're wrong, but because that's what thinking is. It's taking alternative perspectives seriously and having a dialogue with other people and having a dialogue with oneself, which is, you know, what the philosopher Hannah Arendt calls thinking. which is, am I sure about this? How do I know? What's the opposite attitude? What's the contravening information? How can I be certain that my opinions are grounded and sound? And I think it's quite alarming, really, in the United States and also, in Europe, that we have, on the whole, highly polarized media where conflict, contradiction, debate is not really pursued. Instead, we're simply feeding people's established biases and prejudices. That isn't thinking, and it isn't safe.
Extremely well said. And Margaret, you've basically blown my mind about another concept, competition. You have an upcoming book called A Bigger Prize where you examine how damaging competition can be between humans. I mean, once again, flies in the face of everything we've been told. Capitalism based on the foundation of competition. It leads to better technology, more prosperity, better rewards.
Yeah.
You disagree. Yeah. Why?
I have to say, this is a really scary book. I mean, it's one thing to stand up and say you don't believe in God. People can kind of tolerate that. Standing up and saying you don't believe in competition, much, much more frightening. But actually, when you think about it, I think we all know it doesn't work. We wouldn't have regulation if it worked. We wouldn't put in place rules and processes to stem the side effects of competition if those side effects didn't exist. So what I've done is I've really looked at, well, if we allow ourselves the dangerous thought that maybe competition doesn't always work and the best doesn't always get to the top, how in fact does it work? And it's quite a challenging and shocking notion that actually the more competitive you make schools, the more you teach kids to cheat at an earlier age. Rush Kidder at the Institute for Ethics estimates that by the time our kids get to college, 95% of them will have cheated on some exam. That's in college. And then we're surprised if they cheat when they get to work. You look at in the field of sports, the higher the stakes, the more the money, the bigger the prizes, the more the doping. The more we use competitions in high-stakes games, the more the outcomes are what economists call perverse outcomes, as if they're not bound to happen, which is to do with cheating, corruption, inequality. This is a real concern because increasingly what I find in governments and in companies, because nobody can make their mind up or because they're not willing to defend their positions, they're saying increasingly, just let the market decide. This is a profound abdication. We can't let markets decide everything because markets get it wrong. They're not fair, they're unequal, people use secret information, there are profound disequilibriums in markets. There is no free market anywhere. So if that's the case, we need to think very, very carefully about how and when and where we use competition to answer the questions that we should be able to answer in more thoughtful ways.
A lot of huge ideas. It's time to start applying them in our lives. Thank you so much, Margaret Heffernan.
So to take a step back and look at one of the most exciting recent trends as applies to infrastructure within the financial sector, there's a latency arms race going on in financial networking. So we have global exchanges scattered around the world, and they all want to talk to each other for arbitrage, for market-making purposes. And so I'll show you two examples here. These are the fastest current network routes from Chicago to New York and New York to London. Chicago to New York is entirely on land. New York to London is almost entirely through the Atlantic Ocean. And if you take a look at the latencies via spread networks and Hibernia Atlantic on the right, these latencies, the round-trip delays for sending a packet round trip, are actually starting to approach the physical limits allowed for photons traveling through optical fibers around geodesics on the Earth's surface. So for the first time, and this is really only happening in the financial sector, the financial sector is pushing the physical limits of information transmission capabilities around the Earth's surface. And I think that opens up some really intriguing opportunities for exploiting position on the Earth's surface. At the same time that latencies are collapsing around the Earth's surface, information generation that's relevant to these market trading and market making activities remains distributed. So these are a couple of my favorite examples. The first one, not terribly widely known. So UBS, as one example of a firm, has recently started mining live satellite photos of retail parking lots to figure out and to try to reverse engineer store traffic. Second example, social media mining for live trading on the markets, mining sentiment, things like this. These are two of many different examples of why the information generation that's critical to making a profit in the markets is probably going to remain geographically distributed for the foreseeable future. At the same time, we want to reduce latencies and reduce spreads. So taking another step back and realizing that we're stuck on the Earth's surface, at least for the moment, in this geographically distributed trading environment, this is what a typical arbitrage transaction looks like if we think of it as an extended space-time event. So you have two locations that are geographically separated, and trading, even if it's pre-coordinated, needs to be to some extent coordinated after the fact, just if for no other reason than to maintain capital requirements and to maintain net neutral positions wherever possible in the case of arbitrage transactions. So this is the way things, for the most part, are done right now. And this is the way they can be done. And so various firms in the financial sector are already doing some approximation of this, but until recently, there was no universal optimal solution that was known for how best to coordinate trading in multiple locations by positioning yourself in between markets. So to be more concrete, let's say you want to perform trading on both New York exchanges and London exchanges. How do you most efficiently do that in today's latency arms race environment? And the answer turns out to be to position yourself somewhere in between, at least in network terms, New York and London, so that while you're not the first person in the world to hear the latest prices coming off a New York exchange or the London exchange, you are the first to hear the correlations between them. And you can think about this as a sort of financial or econophysical analog of reflex arcs in vertebrate biology. So if you touch something, your finger pulls away before your brain feels the pain from the heat. And this is because the pain signal doesn't have to travel all the way to your brain. It just travels to your spine, and your spine sends the signal back to pull your hand back. Same thing here. If there are arbitrage opportunities, rather than requiring a round-trip transaction, it's possible to position a coordination server at a geographically intermediate location that enables trades to be performed more quickly and coordinated more quickly. So this is the subject of a paper I wrote in Physical Review about 1.5 years ago called Relativistic Statistical Arbitrage that solved the universal problem of where to position such coordinating servers. And the answer turns out to be pretty interesting. I'll skip the derivation since we're running short on time, and I'll just skip to the results. This is the answer. Now, this is few provisos. This is one representative solution set with lots of assumptions. The solution that I've skipped through is actually far more general, but this gives you a flavor of the sort of treasure map that comes from the universal solution. So many of these locations indicated in with small blue dots here, with the larger red dots representing the 50 or so largest world equities exchanges, happen to fall in network sparse areas, especially oceans. And the general heuristic, again, without going through the derivation, is that optimal locations to position yourself tend to be weighted by volatility for the markets that you're trading on. So, for example, you can see in the North Atlantic, there's this sort of nice highway, again, between the New York region, New York, northern New Jersey, and northern Europe, where many of these most promising locations are for building up perhaps ultimately financial seasteads. What would these look like? These would be platforms. In some cases, this is already being done in the Pacific by reappropriating oil platforms that already have the network connectivity You put a bunch of servers on these locations, and then the servers are taking advantage of the unique latency correlations that their geography presents them with in order to optimally coordinate high-frequency trading in a variety of markets. So this gives you a rough sense of where these opportunities lie, and if anyone wants to talk offline more about specific locations as a function of network topology, I'm happy to have that discussion. Moreover, again, skipping over a lot of the physics, turns out that it's not just advantageous to position yourself in one location for every pair of markets. It's actually advantageous to position yourself to handle a variety of trading contingencies along entire geodesics connecting those markets.
I'm going to read a little bit from a paper written by Alex Wissner-Gross and Timothy Sullivan called Participatory Telerobotics. I'm going to skip down to the ending discussion. We expect that our participatory telerobotics system, when fully deployed, will have many uses from intelligence and defense to public health, tourism, and retail. Using a one-to-many anonymized interface, intelligence analysts could rapidly mobilize and activate up to thousands of individuals to survey a region, look for suspicious activity, or even silently lead individuals away from danger. Currently, ubiquitous monitoring has high labor and technical costs, as well as substantial infrastructure hurdles. With a participatory telerobotics system, the cost would be substantially reduced and might be expanded and contracted at will, leveraging civilians to provide micro-aid to the intelligence agencies. Doctors and public health officials could use such a system to rapidly diagnose health-related problems from remote locations and instruct individuals in how to administer topical treatments, take medications, etc. Using the increasingly high-resolution cameras on customer smartphones, doctors could remotely direct patients to move their bodies and zoom in appropriately in order to diagnose and triage visible conditions. Health practitioners could also check in on infirm patients living alone or in groups at a distance. For customers, novel brief tourism experiences might become available, and perhaps even gamified, permitting individuals to briefly activate and direct others so that they can experience new places that they would unlikely or were unable to visit. In addition to virtual tourism, new opportunities open up for remotely inspecting hotels, restaurants, and tourist attractions during trip planning. Similarly, rich experiences also promise to open up for retailers and their customers, enabling the latter to examine products available online or at remote locations in a manner far richer than a 2D image could provide. Similarly, online auction bidders would be able to view products not professionally photographed in 3 dimensions before placing a bid. Of course, emerging mobile device form factors such as heads-up displays will offer major advancements to our participatory telerobotics experience, enabling even more immersive telepresence from a truer visual perspective for all of the above scenarios. With full immersion possible, one might be able to have a tour guide with capabilities of fine remote manipulation of the environment not possible with the present generation telepresence robots at a fraction of the fixed price. In conclusion, we have presented a novel participatory telerobotics system that generates the existing concept of participatory sensing to include real-time teleportation, teleoperation, and telepresence by treating humans with mobile devices as ad hoc telerobots. Because of its ability to interactively elicit physical knowledge and operations through ad hoc collaboration, we anticipate that our participatory telerobotics system will have immediate applications in intelligence, retail, healthcare, security, and travel industries.